We are in the building. As promised, it is time for a real quick story session. You're going to love this one. Once again, in the spirit of Wondrous Boccaccio, I'm thinking back to a cool time during the 90s, and I've decided to play the What If game. And it's cool to do this because there's no ounce of regret or anything like that. But before we do that, once again, I do have to start off with the disclaimer on the in the spirit of Wondrous Boccaccio thing, how that came about. Wondrous Boccaccio was a movie that I was assigned to watch for my Italian class. I want to say way back in 2020, in the spring semester. Yes. And the movie itself was set in Florence during the 14th century. Let me double check that again. Hold on. Yes, 14th century. Excuse me. During the 14th century in Florence, where you have a group of young people that are escaping the city while the Black Plague makes his way through. They go off into the mountains, and as a coping mechanism to keep themselves entertained, they each take turns telling a story every day. So, for us, flashing back to 2020, when we were all awaiting our own plague to kind of pass through, we're in our houses. I get the idea that, you know what, I'm going to just tell a story. We got nothing else to do. So in the spirit of that movie, in the spirit of Wondrous Boccaccio, I'm telling a story. It's been a while since I've done a storytelling kind of a thing like this in a pop-up mode. So let's do it. You know, I'm feeling kind of groovy. I went through a couple of photos and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to share this story. It's really going to be cool. And for starters, it's also going to be something that I kind of shared in the past, but I didn't do like a really deep dive. So yeah, we're going to peel back some onions here. Series of photos. Let's start with this one. Should get a real good view there. White bandana. But that's not really the important part. The most important part would be this right here. It says WFIT staff. There you go. There's a good shot of it right there. WFIT staff. And two more. This is from my first ever DJ gig, Patrick Air Force Base, Cocoa Beach, Florida. You see the crates of records. And the crates are actually hiding the turntables in the mixer. Okay, one more. Once again, the bandana, the headphones, and the shirt, WFIT staff. As much as I am a pack rat when it comes to certain items of clothing, unfortunately, I do not have that shirt anymore. Excuse me, frog in the throat here. Sorry about that. I don't have that shirt anymore. It's so regrettable. I was not a member of the staff at WFIT, but that shirt was given to me as a gift for completion of the internship that I had done when I went over on select Wednesday evenings shadowing a DJ by the name of Spider D. And just kind of learning my way around the station, learning my way around the mixing board and all that kind of stuff, and just learning the ropes on how I could successfully do a radio show. Because the next steps were going to be as follows. Number one, I was sending an application to the FCC to get a restricted radio license. And again, we're talking 1994. early part of 1994. Restricted radio license, as was explained to me, was required before you can do any kind of radio programming. And it didn't matter if it was talk radio, sports radio, news radio, public radio, commercial radio, or in this case, college radio. If it was radio and it was on AM or an FM station or FM dial, if it had a frequency number behind it, you needed a license, and it was the size of a credit card. I think the card was yellow. So that was the first thing I had to do, was submit an application to the FCC. And then the next thing I'd have to do is just basically just kind of wait for slots to open up, and then I can probably just kind of jump in, grab a slot, start making preparations to do the show. Now, as I did mention before, FCC has sent me a notification back saying that the license was no longer a requirement. Okay, well, that's one step down, out the way, all good. Then I just had to wait on the show slots to open up. And I would say it would be akin to what I have to do now with WLUW. Every semester, we have to resubmit applications. Those of us who are community, or in my case, I'm alumni of Loyola, so it still kind of fits the perspective of community. I'm a non-student now. So community / alumni, their slots are pretty regular anyway, but it's the students that have to worry about resubmitting, because eventually students graduate, they move back to wherever they came from, and slots are always on rotation. So with this being WFIT, a college station, and it broadcasts from the campus of Florida Institute of Technology. So again, it's the same kind of environment back then. So while waiting on this, I was just doing some other stuff, and you got, again, just a reminder, I was active duty, so the mission came first. But here's where the what if game kind of comes into play. Some things that I would have thought about while I'm waiting for getting slots. Let's just say, what if I had gotten a radio show, a slot for the radio show, WFIT, how would it have gone? One thing I can say for certain, without a shadow of a doubt, was that it would have been house music. Okay, that's easy. That's like the easiest part of this what if game. The next part would be, how would I have approached the show in a house music perspective? Well, one thing I definitely can say, again, easy answer to the question, is that I would have patterned it or used the blueprint from a legendary show on a legendary station here in Chicago, WKKC. And I would have patterned it after The Q Is On, which broadcast on Sundays from 3 to 6. Hosted by Bobby Q. Bobby. The thing I had always loved about that show was, one, Bobby always broke new artists, new music. Number two, you still had the familiar stuff of old, so you would hear the 70s classics, you would hear the 80s classics. Then you had the occasional interviews. Now, I didn't know anybody in Central Florida. I would have had to probably do some serious networking to get people calling in for interviews and all that kind of stuff. Again, we're talking about Melbourne, Palm Bay, Florida. Again, Central Florida or Space Coast. Or maybe I could have called back home and try to reach out to Terry Hunter or Maurice Joshua or Joe Smooth or Joe Lewis or just whoever was making records at the time, Georgie Porgy or DJ Lil Jon or somebody. Who knows? That I don't know for sure. If I could have maybe tried to do interviews like Bobby did, but as far as those other points, breaking the new music, still revisiting the classics, I would have been able to do that. And then also do a mini mix at some point. I would have done those things. And what would have been really, really, really great for me, what would have made me stand out in terms of the new music, at that time, again, 1994, I had already been established as a regular mail order type of guy, getting stuff from Gramophone, getting stuff from Imports, etc., getting some stuff from Barney's a couple times. 3400 West Ogden. I still remember the address. And then, of course, there was another guy as well who always provided me with some stuff like as soon as it came out. So you're going to have that fresh Chicago perspective. I was getting a lot of new music sent to me through the mail from Chicago and also a few times from New York. But then we also had the local record shop that was located in Rockledge, which was about a 25-minute drive from my dorms. In that record shop, they had a handful of house stuff on the major labels. So you had CeCe Peniston, you had Jomanda, you had Robin S., you had Liddell Townsend with New, which was, of course, picked up by a major. You had some Steve So Curly remixes that were picked up by majors. So, well, like for instance, Paula Abdul. One of my favorite remixes that he's ever done was Paula Abdul, Vibology. So you had that. You had, again, a lot of people might hate me for saying this, but Madonna, when she did Vogue, that kind of slid into the house perspective. But you had like a nice selection of stuff to choose from. Mariah Carey, also with Dream Lover. I remember that showing up on the shelves at the record shop. So I would have had the best of both worlds, from getting stuff from Chicago, a lot of the Chicago underground stuff, but then you also had the commercial stuff that still kind of fit the mold. So I would have been able to announce, hey, here's something new straight from Chicago. I just got it last week. You got to check it out. Blah, 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 blah. So that would have been cool. And that's all I can tell you as far as what I definitely would have tried to do for my approach if I had gotten the radio show. Here are the unknowns. Here are the variables. I can speculate. Looking back, let's say that the show was 2 hours long. Oh, well, no, wait. Before I go to that, before I talk about the hours, there's something else I definitely would have done. And then we'll use that as the segue to the variables. One thing I definitely would have been very, very, very good on is archiving these things. Now, what I did, of course, and this is documented, when I came home each year for my annual leave, I would make it a point to stay at home on Friday nights because of WKKC, Friday Night Network Connection, Friday Night Audio. And I would get into the habit of recording those shows on my realistic, not realistic. At the time, it was Super Tape. I'm looking at my reference here. I'm going to show you a couple more pictures. Or not pictures, but visual aids. But at the time, it was Super Tape. Super Tape cassette tapes from Radio Shack. And for the long shows, basically Friday Night Audio, in order to minimize the time that it would take to stop, eject, remove, flip, reinsert, hit record, that takes time. And in order to minimize those types of time frames, I would get the 120-minute tapes. Friday Night Network Connection was different. There was no pressure for me to try to do it that way because each of the mixes were a half hour long. But for Friday Night Audio, the mixes were an hour a piece. So again, you want an hour on each side, so you cut down on the boom, that action. So again, I had the 120s on lock. I would have done the same thing for the radio shows. Now again, this is where we get back into variables. Let's just say that the show was 2 hours long. If the show was 2 hours, then that would be very, very easy for me to have the 120-minute tapes somewhere in the studio, pop in, play, record, bam, record my sets. But let's just say that the show was 3 hours long, as was, the queue is on. Well, still no problem, because I would do kind of like how we'll say in this visual aid here, because, and again, I did mention 120, as you can see right here, 120 minutes. That's 60 on each side. Now, this one here is, no, let's go to this one, the A side. I did it in reverse. Sorry, guys. A side, for this one here, the queue is on 9/7/90, 5 to 6 p.m. And then on the reverse here, on the B side, you've got Friday Night Network Connection, 9/14/90, 6 to 7 p.m. That's akin to how I would have done this case, because again, if you're doing a 3-hour show, if you're recording for 3 hours, you're going to be using 2 cassettes. Hour 1, hour 2, boom. Hour number 3 on half side. And then you come back the very next week. Hour 1 will be on side 2. Hour number 2 and 3 will be on the next one. Boom. 2 shows, 3 cassettes, if you're doing the math. But now, again, the other variable would be, how would I have gotten all these blank cassettes that I would be desperate to have, because I didn't want to rely on constantly bringing in the 60-minute tapes into the studio. I would have much rather done the 120s. It could have been possible that maybe I would hop in the car and find the local Radio Shack store in Florida, see if I could locate any of these 120s. Where would they have been located? Where would the best option for me to go? Probably Orlando. It's, speculation. Continuing on the what if game, I probably would also have been adventurous enough to pick up the phone, call back to Chicago, and call the Radio Shack store that was located on 86th and Cottage Grove. Because that's where I would have remembered getting all of these back from the get-go. Talk to the manager, talk to the store manager, and just tell them, hey, yeah, my name's Reggie. I'm active duty. I'm down here. I'm calling you from my dorm room in Cocoa Beach, Florida, and I'm getting ready to put on a radio show. It's going to be 2 hours long. It's going to be 3 hours long, and I want those 120-minute tapes so that I can archive my stuff. How can I do like a mass mail order and set up a deal that we can do this on a monthly basis? I might need like about 6 tapes per month. And oh, by the way, I also need your inserts. Yeah, inserts. That's another thing where, at the time, I was still doing my demo tapes. It's like this one here. And realistic. See the realistic right there. For the inserts, the J cards, if you will. And as you can see, a playlist. So, continuing on this what if game, if I had the radio show, not only would I have been bugging out to try to get these 120-minute tapes from Radio Shack, but I would also have gotten the inserts. Would have gotten the inserts, the J cards. I would have gotten the cases themselves as well, so that I could archive every single episode of the shows. That much I know I would have done. But again, securing the hardware, the blank tapes, the J cards, the inserts, the cases. Who knows? I probably could have done this avenue or could have gone that way, but I know I would have tried. One other variable that I really would not have been able to ascertain at the time, at my young age, was what would I title the show? I'm not sure what I would have titled it. I don't know. I have no idea. It probably could have been The House Show. Chicago in the House. I don't know. I never gave it that much thought at the time. I have no written artifacts to revert back to. I have no notes to kind of go. Nothing written down on paper. Nothing. But I do clearly remember that I had that option of waiting for the show because of the internship. Now, that pretty much concludes the what if game. But I can still wrap up the video here by saying what happened or what didn't happen and why, because this is documented, but I'll say it again. Because I kept saying, what if I had gotten the radio show at WFIT, Florida Institute of Technology? The reason why I say it that way is because it never came to fruition. But it wasn't for the bad reasons. It was for all of the wonderful reasons. Because in 1994, early on, I had to make a career decision, as everyone in the Air Force does at certain intervals. If you're serving out, if you're going to be in for a long period of time, you're going to make a career decision. And that decision is, where do you want to be stationed at next? I was at Patrick Air Force Base for coming up on 4 years. And so at 3.5 years, you got to start making decisions. Where do I want to go to next? I had no intentions of actually staying in the U.S. There were no other bases that I wanted to go to. Patrick Air Force Base, Florida was cool. It was a nice assignment. Nice weather, except for when we were running from hurricanes. But in my mind's eye, I wanted to go where the house music was, and there was only one place for me to go for my next assignment where house music reigned supreme, and that was the United Kingdom of Great Britain. At that time, the Air Force had 8 bases in the UK. And on the Air Force Form 392 Airman Assignment Preference Worksheet, we called it the Dream Sheet. And the reason why we called it that is that if you could dream of going somewhere, where would you go? We had 8 spots that we can choose to go in the United States, and we had 8 spots that we can choose for where we wanted to go overseas. For the United States, I left that part blank. For overseas, I completely filled it out. And slots 1 through 8 were every single base that they had in the UK. Using the math, what ended up happening was I got an assignment to a base in the UK because I showed my desperation to go across the pond. So, soon enough, I had an assignment to RAF Alconbury, and I had to report in the middle of July of 1994. So it was under those circumstances that waiting around for a slot to open for the radio show at WFIT was no longer a concern because my career, as always, came first. And I was on the next thing smoking. Came mid-July, crossed the pond to the UK, and the rest, as they say, is history. Because you get over there and you're surrounded by house music. I didn't even think about radio even over there because I was too busy listening to radio stations and going to the different clubs almost every weekend. And I do mean almost every weekend at a different spot. It wasn't London every weekend for me. Sometimes I would have a drought of London for like 2 months because everywhere else had just enough house music as well. But staying in the 90s mode, of course, it's also documented that I did at least get a mixtape played on WKKC in 1997 when I came here on leave. But that was a guest mix. Of course, they played my tape. It was all good. I didn't start doing radio until the 2000s in Salt Lake City, Utah. Or it was Provo, Utah, where I did internet radio from my house. I would say that was 2008, probably. I'll have to double check my archives. But internet radio, and then there was another radio station that was internet based in Salt Lake City that I would do shows on Friday nights, and then kept that up for a few years, and then even several years later after that, when I finally came back to Chicago, terrestrial radio. And so I was still able to jump on that dream of doing radio, not absolutely patterning it after KKC, but still using the same concept of playing the old stuff, playing the new stuff. And then I would still expand to get interviews in and all of that kind of stuff. So it still worked out for me. But it's still kind of fun to play the what if game because I think I would have had a blast introducing Chicago-based house music to Central Florida, or the Space Coast as we called it, because they already had some stuff that was going on. They had their rave scene from time to time, but you didn't really hear a whole lot of the Chicago flavor. So it would have been cool. But London came calling, and I answered quite diligently. I was glad to do it. And being over there changed my whole way of listening to house music. Broadened the ears, broadened the perspective, and life changed. So, I think that's going to do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed the story. I hope you enjoyed the photos. Hope you enjoyed the visual aids as well. Oh yeah, there's nothing really good. You know, I'm going to share one more thing here though. This is just a side note. One more photo, and I'm going to send this out, a shout out to Richard Payton and Doug Smith. And the reason why I'm shouting them out is because of, yeah, there we go. That right there, that sign, 95 North. They actually made up the duo of 95 North. But seeing that sign, I don't remember where I was for that. I think I might have been heading to Chicago, or maybe yeah, that's right. I think I might have been heading to Chicago from Cocoa Beach, because you got to take 95 going north. That might have been it. But yeah, seeing that one, I had to give them a shout, because they were heavy hitters during the 90s. And just as another side note, when I got to the UK, of course, it was REF Alconbury was the base. The city nearby was called Peterborough, and there was a record shop called Exit Records. And one of the first records that I bought in there was a 95 North production. So, there we go. All right, that's going to do it. we're coming up on 30 minutes. I think that's long enough. I'm going to go ahead and sign off. And when I think of another cool topic to tell a story on, we'll get at it. But in the meantime, since I am wearing my Roma Italia shirt, I will say ciao.